The sky above Earth had never looked more alien. From the surface, the approaching fleet of Korlath dreadnoughts seemed to blot out the sun, their sleek, menacing forms casting long shadows over cities. Across the globe, humanity's leaders scrambled in panic as Earth's defenses, decades of preparation, crumbled in mere hours. The first wave of Korlath warships tore through Earth's orbital satellites with ease, their weapons tearing through the communications grid, plunging the world into a chaotic silence. The Earth had no way to fight back. In the heart of the chaos, Dr. Valen Kane paced through his underground lab, the hum of machinery and the low chatter of his research team surrounding him. The team had been working tirelessly for months on what they had believed was an ancient alien relic, buried deep beneath the Earth's crust. They never anticipated the Korlath would come so soon, never imagined they'd need to unlock its secrets under such dire circumstances. But the invasion had forced their hand. "We don't have much time," Kane muttered, his voice barely audible over the rising storm of his thoughts. His fingers danced over the console in front of him, scanning through the data that appeared on the holographic screen. The artifact's power, pulsing faintly, seemed to hum in response to his presence, almost as if it were alive, aware of the impending destruction. "The shield's activation is unstable, but if we can harness its power..." His second-in-command, Captain Alina Hayes, appeared at his side, her face drawn with exhaustion. "We don't have the luxury of time. The Korlath are already breaching our defenses. If we don't deploy something to counteract their weapons now, the Earth will fall." Kane turned toward her, his expression grim. "The artifact is our only hope, Alina, but we need to be certain it works. There's no turning back once we activate it." A deep silence followed. Hayes hesitated, her gaze flicking to the artifact, a glowing, crystalline object embedded in a stone casing at the center of their lab. The relic had been unearthed during an archaeological dig in Antarctica, and no one had known its true purpose. The Korlath, however, were ancient, and their technology was beyond anything Earth had encountered. Had they known about the artifact? Had it been left behind by a civilization lost to time? "I'll take the risk," Hayes said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We either fight or we die. Let's make this work, Kane." Without another word, Kane and Hayes activated the controls, and the artifact pulsed brighter. An energy field expanded from it, and the air crackled with power. They could feel it, an immense energy, raw and uncontrollable, flooding through the lab systems. A low hum reverberated from the core of the relic, building in intensity. Suddenly, the communication system came back online with a rush of static. A voice cut through the noise, a voice that sent a chill down Kane's spine. "This is General Roland of Earth's Allied Forces," the voice said, urgent and shaking. "We've lost all major cities. The Korlath forces are overwhelming us. We need immediate assistance. If you have a weapon, now's the time to use it." Kane looked at Hayes, determination hardening in his eyes. "Activate it now. We have no choice." Without hesitation, they sent the command to the artifact, and the world shook. The energy field exploded outward, sending waves of force across the planet. For a brief moment, the world went silent. Then the heavens seemed to crack open as a beam of radiant light shot up from the Earth, reaching towards the invading fleet. As the first Korlath dreadnoughts were engulfed in the blinding light, Kane's heart raced. This is just the beginning. But he had no idea what horrors lay ahead. The air was thick with tension as the light from the artifact's energy beam faded, leaving behind a lingering hum that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of Earth. Dr. Valen Kane stood in front of the flickering holographic display, his eyes fixed on the data streaming across the screen. The initial feedback was promising. Kane had expected the energy beam to be a temporary countermeasure, a single strike that would buy Earth some time. But as the minutes passed, it became clear the beam had done more than that. The Korlath fleet had been halted, their ships now floating aimlessly in space, unable to move. Their power systems had short-circuited, their weapons crippled. The battle was far from over, though. General Roland, report. Kane barked into the communication system, his hands flying across the console. The general's voice crackled through, strained with urgency. Dr. Kane, that beam did something to them. Their ships aren't responding to any commands. They're dead in the water, but they're still floating out there. We can't afford to wait too long. They'll adapt. We need to finish this. Kane turned to his team, his heart racing. The Eternal Shield, the relic they had unearthed months ago, had done more than just stop the Korlath. It had created a massive, temporary anomaly in their power grid. But this anomaly was unstable. The artifact's power, which had once felt like a distant hum, now reverberated through every fiber of his being, like an unearthly pulse calling to him. The power surge is not just from the beam, Kane muttered to himself as his mind processed the new data. It's coming from the artifact itself. Hayes, who had been silently watching him, stepped forward. What does that mean? Kane glanced at her, his mind racing. It means the artifact is alive. It's not just a weapon, it's a living entity, and I think it's reaching out to us. As if on cue, the artifact flickered again, its crystalline surface rippling with waves of energy. The light inside seemed to twist, bend, and shift. Kane felt a sudden, sharp surge of power flooding his senses. Images flashed before his eyes, visions of distant worlds, alien civilizations, and star systems teeming with life. And then, a single terrifying realization struck him. The artifact was not only capable of immense destruction, but it was also a key to unlocking something much bigger, something that could change the very fabric of reality itself. Valen? Hayes' voice broke through his trance, her tone a mix of concern and determination. We need to act now. The Korlath are trying to regain control. They're sending a signal, one that could override any attempt at disabling their fleet. What do we do? Kane's mind snapped back to the present. We have to use the artifact again, but this time, we won't just aim at their fleet. We need to disrupt their entire command structure, every last trace of their network. If we don't, they'll adapt and come at us harder. Hayes hesitated, her eyes scanning the fluctuating data. You want us to use that thing again. After the first blast, it nearly drained the power grid for the entire continent. I don't have a choice, Kane said, his voice tight with the weight of the decision. We have to stop them. If we don't, Earth is finished. As he spoke, the artifact pulsed once more, its energy flowing into him. The strange sensations intensified, as if the shield was recognizing him, bonding with him. Kane stumbled back, gripping the console as a wave of power surged through him. It was more than just a weapon. The artifact's power was starting to take hold of him, not just in his body, but in his very soul. The Korlath were not simply invaders, they were part of a much older game, and this artifact was the final piece. I can feel it, Kane whispered, a chill running down his spine. This isn't just a fight for Earth anymore. This is a fight for the universe itself. The lights in the lab flickered as the artifact's energy reached a crescendo. Outside, the Korlath ships began to stir, their engines starting to hum back to life. Time was running out. Kane knew that using the artifact again would push it, and him, past the point of no return. But the alternative was unthinkable. With a final, resolute breath, Kane gave the command. The power coursed through him, flooding his senses and spreading outward, a wave of energy that would change everything. The surge of power from the artifact overwhelmed Kane's senses, but his mind remained focused. The energy flooded his veins, pulsing with an intensity he had never imagined possible. He could feel the raw, untapped potential of the Eternal Shield coursing through him, connecting his thoughts to the vast expanse of space in the Korlath fleet that loomed just beyond Earth's atmosphere. Ready, Dr. Kane, Captain Hayes' voice cut through the growing hum in the lab. Do you want us to deploy the command now?" Kane didn't answer immediately. His hands trembled slightly as he steadied himself against the console. The light from the artifact spilling across the room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He could hear the distant rumble of the Earth's surface shaking, the result of the artifact's immense energy trying to breach the very fabric of space-time itself. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The Korlath fleet, temporarily crippled, had begun to regain movement. Their ships, though damaged, were trying to realign and reorganize. Their command ship, a colossal dreadnought, was sending out frantic signals. Kane could feel the alien intelligence behind it, distant yet still threatening. They were not done. Kane's voice came out low, steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Yes, deploy it now." Without hesitation, Hayes issued the command. The lab's machinery hummed louder, and the ground shook as the artifact's energy reached its apex. For a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. Time itself seemed to hang in the balance as the cosmic power inside the relic began to respond to Kane's call. Then, in a single blinding flash, the energy released. A brilliant beam of light shot out from the artifact, piercing the atmosphere and streaking toward the Korlath fleet. Kane's vision blurred as the wave of power expanded outward, cascading through space like an unstoppable tidal wave. It connected with the Korlath ships, bending their trajectories, scrambling their systems once more. But this time, the beam didn't just disable their weaponry, it seemed to tear at the very fabric of their command structure, unraveling their communication network like fragile threads. The Korlath forces struggled, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The wave of energy didn't just disrupt, it erased their ability to function as a coherent unit. Their orders no longer being received as the command ship exploded in a cascade of sparks and collapsing structures. The chaos was palpable. Kane's vision spun as the artifact's power threatened to overwhelm him. His body felt as though it were on fire, every muscle screaming as the force within him surged. He had never anticipated this kind of power, this kind of responsibility. He could feel the presence of the eternal shield growing stronger, trying to force him to yield to its will, to embrace its true nature. But Kane resisted, using every ounce of his willpower to stay grounded in the present. He couldn't lose himself, not now. "We did it," Hayes whispered, awe in her voice. "The fleet is disabled. We've bought ourselves time." But Kane's eyes never left the display. His heart was still pounding in his chest, the rhythm almost alien. The Korlath were down, but they were not out. He knew their next move would be even more ruthless. The fleet was already regrouping, coordinating with their remaining forces, trying to reorganize in the chaos. This would only be a temporary reprieve. "There's more coming," Kane said quietly, his gaze hardening. "This is only the beginning." As the energy began to dissipate from the artifact, he staggered backward, clutching the edge of the console. His breath came in sharp gasps, and his mind reeled from the experience. The bond with the artifact was undeniable now. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a part of him. And with it came a terrifying realization. The longer he used it, the more it would reshape him. "We need to prepare," Kane said, his voice strained but determined. "The Korlath won't stop until they've wiped us out completely. We've just given them a taste of our power, but we have to be ready for their retaliation." Hayes nodded, her eyes filled with a newfound resolve. "What's the plan, Kane?" Kane turned toward her, his expression solemn. "We take the fight to them. This time, we finish it. We can't afford to wait any longer." Outside, the remnants of the Korlath fleet slowly began to regroup, their ships barely holding together after the devastating wave of energy. The battle for Earth had just begun, and Kane was about to lead humanity in a fight like no other. The days that followed were a blur of chaos and preparation. Dr. Valen Kane stood at the command center, his eyes scanning the maps and projections of the Korlath forces, but his mind was elsewhere. The artifact's power still lingered in his body, a constant pulse that gnawed at his soul. It was becoming harder to focus. The energy was too much. It wasn't just a tool, it was beginning to change him, to mold him into something unrecognizable. His reflection in the window reminded him of this growing transformation. His eyes were brighter, sharper, almost glowing with the same energy that flowed from the eternal shield. "Dr. Kane," Captain Elena Hayes' voice broke his reverie. "We've got a problem." Kane turned, his brow furrowing as he looked at her. Hayes had been his closest ally since the invasion began. She had stood by him through the madness, trusting him even when his decisions grew more unpredictable. But now there was something in her gaze, something different. "What is it?" Kane asked, his voice strained. "I've just received intel from one of our military outposts. A faction of the resistance has broken away," Hayes said, her face grim. "They're heading toward a Korlath stronghold. They think that we're losing control, and they believe the artifact's power is too dangerous. They're planning to destroy it." Kane's heart skipped a beat. "What?" His voice was sharp, disbelief flooding his mind. "No, they can't." "They can, and they will," Hayes replied, her tone heavy with regret. "A growing faction of the military believes that the artifact's power is corrupting you, Valen. They think it's only a matter of time before you lose control. They're willing to do anything to stop you." A cold wave of anger washed over Kane. Betrayal wasn't new in times of war, but this was personal. He had worked so hard to harness the artifact's power for humanity's survival, yet now, the very people he had fought to protect were willing to turn on him. And the worst part? He could see their reasoning. The artifact was changing him, pulling him further from who he once was. "I knew this would happen," Kane muttered under his breath. His fingers clenched into fists, the power inside him surging in response to his frustration. "They're afraid of what we could become." "We don't have time for infighting," Hayes snapped, her voice hard. "If we don't stop them, they'll destroy the only weapon we have against the Korlath." Kane's mind raced. The enemy within was just as dangerous as the alien invaders. This splinter faction, led by General Roland, had been a staunch supporter of Kane at the beginning, but now they saw him as a threat. A threat they were willing to eliminate. If they destroyed the artifact, humanity's chances of winning the war would vanish. "Then we have to stop them before they get to the stronghold," Kane said, his voice cold with resolve. "Gather the remaining forces. We're going to face them head-on." Hayes hesitated, her face reflecting the weight of the decision. "Valen, if we do this, we're crossing a line. You know that, right? They're not the Korlath, but they're still our people. We can't." "I'll handle it," Kane interrupted, his voice firm. He knew what he had to do. "The fate of Earth is on the line. If they want to betray us, then they'll learn that the price of disloyalty is far greater than they can imagine." The command center was filled with the frantic sound of scrambling soldiers and technicians as they prepared for the mission. Kane's mind was already elsewhere, consumed with the task at hand. The artifact's power hummed at the edges of his consciousness, pushing him forward, urging him to act. It had become a constant companion, like an invisible hand guiding his every move, sometimes gently, sometimes with unrelenting force. As Kane and Hayes led the charge toward the rebel stronghold, the tension was palpable. They were not just fighting the Korlath anymore. They were fighting their own people. His thoughts began to swirl again, the whispers of the artifact growing louder in his mind. What would he become by the end of this, a savior or a tyrant? The answer was beginning to blur. The journey to the rebel stronghold was nothing short of a desperate race against time. Kane's mind was consumed with conflicting emotions, rage, fear, and an unsettling sense of inevitability. The artifact's power seemed to pulse within him, urging him forward with an intensity that bordered on madness. Every step he took felt heavier, as if the weight of the decision ahead was pressing down on him. He had chosen this path, but at what cost? Hayes was by his side, her expression a mixture of concern and unwavering determination. "Valen, we need to talk. You don't have to do this. We can find another way." Kane shook his head, cutting her off. "No, we don't have time for alternatives. General Roland and his faction won't stop until they destroy the artifact. If they succeed, we lose everything. The Korlath are still out there, waiting for their next move. This is the only way." Hayes fell silent, though her eyes betrayed the doubt she could not hide. But she didn't challenge him again. She knew better than anyone that the choice was made. Kane had already decided his course. The stronghold came into view, a heavily fortified military base nestled deep within the mountains, surrounded by high walls and layers of defenses. The rebel faction had taken control of it with swift precision, turning it into an impenetrable fortress. But Kane was no stranger to warfare. They had prepared for this moment, and he was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. As they neared the outer gates, the sounds of gunfire and the hum of energy shields filled the air. The rebels were ready. Kane's forces stormed forward, clashing with the traitors at the gates. There was no subtlety in the attack. They fought with brutal efficiency, taking down every last line of defense in their way. The rebels weren't prepared for the sheer strength of Kane's forces, but they were desperate, and desperation made them dangerous. Inside the stronghold, General Roland awaited them. Kane knew he would be there, waiting at the heart of this betrayal. He had been Kane's ally, his friend, someone who had fought side by side with him against the Korlath in the early days of the war. But now Roland had become an enemy that had turned against him and everything they had worked for. The battle raged on, but Kane's focus remained on the mission. He and Hayes cut through the chaos, heading straight for the command center at the heart of the base. The deeper they went, the more the sounds of battle seemed to fade. It was as though the stronghold had become a tomb, the walls reverberating with the weight of the choices that had brought them here. Finally, they reached the command center, a sleek, high-tech facility at the center of the base, surrounded by monitors flashing with reports of the battle outside. There, standing at the center of it all, was General Roland. His face was grim, but there was no hesitation in his eyes when he looked up at Kane. "Valen," Roland said coldly, his voice laced with disappointment. "I hoped it wouldn't come to this, but you've become a danger to us all. That artifact is too powerful, too unpredictable. We can't allow it to control you, to control all of us." Kane's heart thudded in his chest, but he forced the words out. "You've betrayed everything we've fought for, Roland. The Korlath are still out there. If we don't stop them, we'll lose everything we've worked for, and you want to destroy the only weapon that can save us." Roland's eyes hardened, and he stepped forward. "It's not just a weapon, Valen. It's a curse. You've become a puppet to it. I can see it in your eyes. You're not the same person who fought beside me. You're losing yourself." Kane clenched his fists, the pulse of the artifact's energy growing stronger inside him. The power was pushing him, urging him to act, to end this once and for all. "I'm not losing myself," Kane said, his voice low, filled with a dark determination. "I'm saving humanity. If you can't see that, then you're just as lost as the Korlath." The air in the room grew tense, thick with the weight of their words. Roland stared at him, eyes flicking to the glowing energy of the artifact that was now radiating from Kane's body, a silent testament to the power that was changing him. "I gave you the chance to walk away, Valen," Roland said softly, almost regretfully. "But I can't let you continue down this path. Not anymore." With a swift motion, Roland activated the self-destruct sequence, a countdown flashing on the nearby monitors. The stronghold was rigged to detonate, taking everything with it: Kane, the artifact, and his forces. Roland had made his final move. Kane's heart raced. "You've sealed your fate, Roland." In an instant, the artifact pulsed with an intensity so great it rattled the walls of the command center. Kane's body surged with power, his very being shaking with the energy coursing through him. The countdown was nearing its end, but it wasn't over yet. The countdown echoed in the command center, each second ticking away like a death knell. Kane's eyes locked with General Roland's, the weight of betrayal heavy in the air. The hum of the eternal shield thrummed beneath his skin, its power pressing against him like an invisible force. It wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was part of him, shaping him, pushing him towards something far greater than he had ever intended. "You're making a mistake, Valen," Roland said, his voice strained with the tension of the moment. "We can't allow this kind of power to exist. You're not the man you once were. The artifact is controlling you." Kane's chest rose and fell with the pressure of his rapidly escalating emotions. The artifact's influence was undeniable, its power growing within him by the second, but he couldn't let that define him. He had fought for this moment, for humanity's survival. The Korlath were still out there, still waiting for their chance to strike. The artifact was their greatest hope, and now Roland wanted to destroy it, and with it, humanity's last chance. "You've lost sight of what's at stake, Roland," Kane said, his voice cold, unwavering. "We're fighting for Earth's survival, for our future. If you want to sacrifice that, then you're no better than the Korlath." Roland's jaw tightened, his fingers hovering over the console. The countdown continued, the seconds slipping away like sand through an hourglass. "I'm not sacrificing Earth. I'm saving it from you. From this power that's corrupting everything it touches. I thought you were a man of reason, Valen. But you've become a weapon, and weapons don't think. They only destroy." Kane felt the artifact's pulse spike, the energy surging through him like a living thing. He could feel the truth in Roland's words, like a bitter taste in his mouth. But he couldn't turn back. Not now, not after everything they had sacrificed. The Korlath were on the brink of wiping out humanity. If Roland was allowed to destroy the artifact, the war would be lost, and Earth would fall into darkness. With a sharp motion, Kane raised his hand, his palm glowing with the artifact's energy. "I won't let you do this." Before Roland could react, the pulse of energy erupted from Kane, surging through the command center and tearing apart the control panels around them. Sparks flew in all directions as the rune shook with the force of the explosion. The countdown paused, the monitors flickering in and out of life. Roland staggered back, his face pale as the power radiating from Kane knocked him off balance. Kane's heart pounded in his chest, but he remained focused. The artifact had made its final push. It had connected with him in a way he could no longer deny. It wasn't just controlling him. It was amplifying every emotion, every desire, and every thought, blurring the line between who he was and who he was becoming. "I'm doing this for humanity," Kane said through gritted teeth, his voice low and filled with purpose. "I'm not your enemy, Roland, but I will stop you." Roland's eyes widened, but there was no fear there, only an eerie calm. He knew Kane had gone too far. The power Kane wielded now was unlike anything he could understand. He had hoped to stop the madness, but now he could see that the path was set. "You've already crossed the line," Roland whispered almost to himself. "It's too late." Kane's breath quickened, the pressure of the artifact's energy becoming unbearable. His mind screamed for clarity, but it was drowned out by the power surging through his veins. He was the only one who could stop the Korlath now, and the artifact had shown him just how. He could feel the remnants of Roland's resolve flickering, his will cracking under the pressure of the artifact's power. Kane could end this right here, right now. He could finish the fight in a single decisive blow. But the words lingered in his mind. "It's too late." He looked at Roland, who was now backing away, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resignation. Roland had been right about one thing. Kane was no longer the man he had been. The power of the Eternal Shield was reshaping him, both inside and out. But it wasn't just the power that worried Kane. It was the cost of wielding it. "What happens now?" Hay's voice broke through the fog in Kane's mind. She stood in the doorway, her gaze shifting between the two men, her face filled with concern. Valen, we need to finish this. The Korlath are regrouping. They won't wait for us to sort this out. Kane turned toward her, his chest heaving with the weight of his decisions. The artifact's power roared inside him, demanding action. But in that moment, something inside him snapped. He wasn't just fighting to protect humanity anymore. He was fighting for his very soul. He had become a weapon. But could he still be the man who could lead? We finish this, Kane said, his voice steely, resolute. But I need to make a choice. The artifact, it's changing everything. Hayes nodded, understanding the unspoken words. It wasn't just the Korlath that they had to defeat anymore. It was the man Kane was becoming. The tension in the command center was palpable as Kane stood there, caught between the looming threat of the Korlath fleet and the growing power of the artifact inside him. Hayes was right. The Korlath were regrouping, and the time for hesitation was gone. Every second spent questioning his choices brought them closer to defeat. Yet, despite the urgency, Kane couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something fundamental inside him was slipping away. Valen, Hayes urged, stepping closer. Her voice was gentle but firm. We can't waste any more time. The Korlath are mobilizing for an all-out assault. If we don't hit them now, while they're disorganized, they'll rebuild and come at us harder than before. We finish this now, or Earth will burn. Kane swallowed, his hands trembling slightly as he glanced down at the glowing energy emanating from his chest. The artifact's pulse was unrelenting, a constant reminder of how far he'd come and how much further he might go. You're right, Kane said finally, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his inner conflict. We need to act. I'll coordinate the attack, but I need you to prepare the last wave of fighters. I don't care how many ships we lose, we're taking this fight to the Korlath. I'll take care of the artifact. Hayes nodded, her eyes filled with determination. You sure about this, Valen? You're not the same man you were before. This power. I know, Kane interrupted, his tone resolute. But I've made my choice. I'll be humanity's weapon, and I'll make sure the Korlath know what happens when they threaten Earth. The urgency in his words seemed to break through the fog of doubt that clouded his thoughts. It was true, Kane wasn't the same. But maybe, just maybe, that was what Earth needed now, someone who could stand against the Korlath without fear of crossing the line. The artifact was a dangerous force, yes, but it was also their greatest weapon, and Kane was its wielder. Without another word, Hayes turned and rushed to the communications hub to coordinate the attack. Kane remained where he was, his thoughts racing as he prepared himself for what lay ahead. The Korlath were not just invaders, they were predators, relentless and methodical, and they would not be swayed by anything less than total annihilation. As he walked toward the command console, Kane's mind wandered to Earth's future, the lives that depended on him, the hope that the human race had placed in his hands. It all came down to this moment. Could he control the power of the artifact, or would it consume him like it had Roland? Kane's fingers hovered over the controls, and for a moment he hesitated. The energy from the eternal shield pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, growing stronger, more insistent. It had changed him. The energy was too raw, too potent. He could feel it pushing him, urging him to embrace it fully, to give in to the power that could reshape the universe itself. But as he stood there, poised on the edge, Kane understood the danger. The artifact didn't just offer power, it offered a path to absolute control, a path he could not walk if he wanted to remain human. He had to balance this, he had to control it. With a steady breath, Kane closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the flow of energy surround him. He had made a pact with the artifact, but he wouldn't let it dictate who he became. It was not his master, it was his tool, his responsibility. The battle ahead would determine not just the fate of Earth, but his own. In that instant, his mind cleared. He opened his eyes, his decision made. The Korlath fleet was nearing Earth's orbit, their massive warships aligned for a final strike. But Kane's forces were ready. Outside the stronghold, Fighter ships filled the sky, preparing for the assault. The air was thick with anticipation, every soldier knowing that this battle would define everything. The final countdown began. Kane could feel the intensity of the moment coursing through him, the sheer weight of what was to come. He could either destroy the Korlath or lose everything in the process. But this time, he wasn't fighting alone. "Deploy all units," Kane ordered, his voice booming through the comms. "We end this today." With that, the final wave of humanity's fleet launched into the sky, heading straight for the heart of the Korlath warships. The battle for Earth was about to reach its violent, decisive peak. Kane's hands trembled on the controls as the Eternal Shield's power surged through him one last time. As the first Korlath ships exploded in the distance, Kane's mind turned to the cost of victory. What would he become after all this? Would he survive the artifact's pull, or would it be the end of the man who once was? He didn't know, but for now, all that mattered was that humanity would fight until the end, and Kane would lead them. The battle unfolded in a fury of explosions and energy blasts. The sky above Earth, once calm, had become a swirling chaos of fire and light, a testament to humanity's final stand. Kane stood at the heart of the conflict, his hands trembling as he directed his forces with unparalleled precision. The Korlath fleet was vast, but Earth's forces were determined, fueled by desperation and the knowledge that they had no other choice. Kane's mind buzzed with the power of the Eternal Shield. The artifact surged within him, its energy amplifying every command, every thought. It felt as though the artifact and his body were one. His mind was sharp, his senses heightened, and his power limitless. But even in the midst of all this power, there was a growing weight in his chest, a feeling that something was slipping beyond his control. Despite the monumental force of humanity's fleet, the Korlath were relentless. Their ships, advanced and deadly, seemed to reform and regroup no matter how many were destroyed. The battle wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a race against time. If Kane's forces couldn't break the Korlath's momentum now, it would be too late. The Korlath had already begun deploying their ground forces, massive war machines that could level entire cities. Kane's breath caught as he watched the first of the monstrous walkers touch down on Earth's surface, their weapons charged and ready to unleash destruction. "Deploy the final wave," Kane commanded through clenched teeth. "We stop them now, or we lose everything." Hayes's voice crackled through the comms, strained but unwavering. "Roger that. The fighters are ready. We're coming in for a final push. Hold your ground, Valen." Kane nodded, his eyes narrowing as the battlefield stretched out before him. The Korlath might be relentless, but humanity had one advantage they could never replicate: the will to survive. He pushed the power of the Eternal Shield to its limits, summoning every ounce of energy he could muster. He could feel the artifact's influence as it coursed through him, and yet, in the back of his mind, he wondered how long he could keep this up before it took everything from him. The battle intensified. Energy bolts streaked through the sky as the Korlath ships faltered under the weight of humanity's assault. But Kane knew this wouldn't be enough. The Korlath were too numerous, their forces too entrenched. The artifact was his last hope, their last hope. With a deep breath, Kane made his decision. "Hayes," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Get the fleet to withdraw. I'm going in." "Valen, what are you?" Hayes's voice was filled with alarm, but Kane didn't give her a chance to finish. "No more time, Hayes. We have to finish this now." Kane knew that the only way to stop the Korlath was to strike at their heart. Their command ship, the core of their operations, had been hiding in the darkness of space, out of reach. But now it had revealed itself, and if he could destroy it, the Korlath's command would crumble, their forces left in disarray. It was a risky move, perhaps even a suicidal one, but there was no other way. Without waiting for another word, Kane activated the final sequence on the artifact. The energy it unleashed was unlike anything he had ever felt before, an overwhelming surge of pure destruction that radiated outward in all directions. His body trembled under the strain as the artifact responded to his command, channeling its power into his very soul. But there was no time to think about the cost. The Korlath fleet was on the brink of victory, and only this final strike could turn the tide. Kane's ship was the first to break through the Korlath defenses. His heart raced as he locked onto the command ship, the massive vessel looming ahead like a dark metallic monster. With the power of the eternal shield crackling around him, Kane fired everything he had. A single shot, guided by the artifact's energy, collided with the heart of the Korlath ship. The explosion that followed was deafening, a blinding light that consumed everything in its wake. For a moment, there was nothing, silence, and then a wave of energy rippled through the space around him. The Korlath fleet staggered, their command structure shattered in an instant. Ships began to retreat, their morale broken, their forces crumbling under the sudden loss of leadership. Kane knew they had won, but at what cost? His ship began to spiral out of control. The artifact's power had taken everything he had. Everything. His body was no longer able to sustain the strain. His vision blurred, and the pull of unconsciousness threatened to drag him under. He fought to maintain control, to stay alive long enough to see Earth's victory, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. In the distance, Hayes's voice came through the comms again, full of relief and triumph. "Valen, you did it. The Korlath are retreating. We've won." Kane smiled faintly, though the pain was unbearable. His hands gripped the controls, but they felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. He had done it. The Korlath were defeated. Earth was saved. But as he looked out at the stars, the vast expanse of space, Kane realized the truth. The artifact's power had taken everything from him. He had fought for humanity's future, but he had lost his own. And as the darkness closed in, he whispered one last word. "Worth it."